Welcome to the Sencast. My name is Dale Pickles, Managing Director of B Squared and the host of the Sencast. If this is your first Sencast, then welcome to the Sencast. The aim of the podcast is really simple. We want to reach lots of people and help everyone learn about special educational needs and disability. This week I was joined by Chantal Bryan, OBE, and Sarah Giles from Teach Us Too, an organisation that wants all children to be taught literacy regardless of their label. And Chantelle took her son out of special school to teach him to read and write. She could see that due to his labels, he wasn't seen as capable of being able to read and write. And Sarah is a teacher and Senko and has worked with Chantelle to educate Chantelle's son Jonathan. And on this week's show, we discussed the importance of literary education for all learners, and a really interesting podcast where we often think about, we assume a child's abilities by their label and their physical disabilities. But a lot of children like Jonathan, although they may have complex physical disabilities, it doesn't always impact their intellectual disability. And when we talk about PMLD, that profound and multiple learning difficulties, perhaps there should be PMPD, that profound and multiple physical disabilities. The Sencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. Everyone knows we help schools to show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make, and we can do this across a wide range of abilities and levels. But did you know about Autism Progress? This is our framework for helping profile a student's autism and how it impacts them. It is based on CERT, and it looks at communication, social interaction, emotional regulation, and flexible thinking. And Autism Progress also includes a wide range of strategies to help the practitioner to support the pupils. Visit the B Squared website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me so I can take you through Autism Progress and how it can help you. Now, go and enjoy the podcast. In this week's show, we're discussing the importance of literary education for all learners, with a really big emphasis on all. My guests this week are Chantal Bryan, OBE, and Sarah Giles, once letters after her name something, from Teach Us Too. She got a bit jealous she doesn't have letters. We'll add some in later. Teach Us Too wants all children to be taught literacy regardless of their label. And Chantelle took her son out of a special school to teach him to read and write. She could see that due to his labels, he wasn't seen as being capable of being able to read and write. Sarah was a teacher and a Senko and has worked with Chantelle to home educate Chantelle's son, Jonathan. And it was Jonathan who created Teach Us Too, and he asked Sarah to lead on his behalf. Welcome to the show, Chantelle and Sarah.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi there.
So let's start the podcast by talking about Jonathan. At the start of the story, he was unable to read and write, not because he couldn't, but due to his labels. His education didn't include literacy. It was a sensory-based curriculum. You believed he could read and write, or should have the opportunity to read and write. And with your joint determination, you have helped Jonathan to learn to read and write in a way that works for him. So, where is Jonathan now? What is he doing?
So Jonathan started at Bath Spa University in September. He's doing creative writing part-time, very part-time. He's doing one module per semester, so it's going to take 9 years to complete the undergraduate degree. Towards the end of his first semester, he's really enjoying it, so that's great. But I have to say, actually, before we go on, that when I took him out of school, I took him out of special school for an hour and a half in the mornings to do basic literacy and basic numeracy. It was under the guidance of Marion Stanton, who runs CANDLE, which is Communication and Learning Education, I think. Is the LE Learning Education? Yes, good. And she's an expert in teaching children who use AAC how to learn to read and write. And she just said, why don't you give it a go? I didn't know whether he'd be able to do it. I didn't know whether he'd be able to learn to read. I didn't know whether he'd be able to learn to write. But actually, at school, he wasn't being given a go. And so under her guidance, we gave it a go. And it took a year before he started spelling everything he wanted to say and everything he wanted to write. And it was then I realised, gosh, actually, there's a lot going on in that head that I didn't know about before. So it as a charity, we really stand for children being given the opportunity to learn to read and write. And I think that's really important. I think sometimes people look at Jonathan and think, well, he's exceptional. He's at university, and I've got children in the class, and I can't see any of them at university. And this is just one person's story. But actually, as a charity, we really believe that if you give children the chance to be able to learn to read and write, you don't know where the limit is. It may just be that they enjoy the opportunity to have exposure to words and to be able to have a look at them and to have that kind of rich text environment that neurotypical children have. It may be that they learn to be able to read for themselves. It may be that they go on to write CVC words. It may be that they go on to write a book like Jonathan. You just don't know. Unless you try, you just don't know.
So how would you describe Jonathan's needs? So people listening can get an idea of kind of his challenges that you've all worked to kind of overcome.
Yeah, Jonathan was born as a result of a car accident. I was in a car accident when I was 36 weeks pregnant. And the initial prognosis was not good. So his kidneys didn't work. He was predicted to have moderate to severe cerebral palsy about 2 weeks old from an MRI scan. It's turned out to be more severe. So he's quadriplegic. He can move his arms and legs, but not in a sort of purposeful enough way to be able to use switches. So we did try switches for a while, but to use switches to communicate, you need to be able to use a muscle quite consistently in a time frame. And he just couldn't do that. He's got a bit of athetoid movement as well, so there's some uncontrolled movement. His kidney failure became chronic kidney failure. He spent a lot of his early years on dialysis, both at hospital, going 3 times a week, and then we did dialysis at home overnight. And just before his 4th birthday, he got a kidney transplant, which completely transformed his life. It was a cadaveric kidney, so it's from someone who passed away, and their family had really generously given the kidney to him, and it stopped dialysis overnight. He became a completely different, from a health point of view, much weller child. But unfortunately, he got an adenovirus, which is a bit like coronavirus, shortly after his kidney transplant because of all the anti-rejection medicines he was on. And that made him oxygen dependent. So we sort of we didn't swap the dialysis. The dialysis was so life-consuming, but Jonathan ended up needing oxygen as well. So from a health point of view, quite a complex picture. He was diagnosed as having an auditory neuropathy. He was little, so they didn't think he'd be able to hear anything. But actually, even consultants in Bristol who were looking after his kidneys said, I think he can hear things. So although he's got this diagnosis of auditory neuropathy, his hearing is generally quite good. I just said, in a crowded room, it's not great. So actually, really busy classrooms can be quite problematic for him. Which meant that primary was slightly harder for him actually than secondary, where the teacher's standing at the front and talking, and then pupils are kind of listening and doing work. And he's also been diagnosed with CVI, so that's a visual impairment, cerebral visual impairment, which means that things have to be a bit more high contrast and a bit bigger for him to be able to see them. So if he's reading on a screen, for instance, the print's quite big and it's black with white writing on top, and a bit more space between the words. So there are quite a lot of physical challenges in terms of access for reading and writing that we had to overcome when we started teaching him. And the other issue he has, a divergent squint. So we tried eye gaze machines, and it just really struggled to pick his eyes up to know which eye he was looking with, because it's divergent. So he'll look with one eye and then he'll put the other eye sort of to sleep in the corner, and then sometimes he switches. You can see him do that. The computer really struggled with that. And the other thing the eye gaze machine struggled with was his nasal cannula, so for the oxygen. I think he might be the only child in the country that can use eye gaze with his eyes closed, because he closes his eyes and it's looking for the glint in your eyes. And because his nasal cannula reflected the light, there were more than one occasion where we thought he was using it, and he had his eyes shut and was just moving his head around, and it was picking up. So the high tech became quite problematic for him. And Marion helped us develop using an e-tran frame. So initially, we were just putting individual letters on an e-tran frame and whole words. So he was doing whole word reading. And then for phonics, we were using letters stuck on an e-tran frame. And actually, that's something as a charity we come across, that people say, am I talking too much? I feel like I'm talking a lot.
We don't come across that very often.
Sarah can take over.
You can come up for air.
So what is this? Was it e-tran frame?
Yes.
Yes.
Explain to me what an e-tran frame is, Sarah.
Okay, so the e-tran frame is a Perspex board that is A3-ish size for Jonathan, and it has a hole in the middle, so where there's an absence of Perspex, a donut, if you will, and you can stick things onto the e-tran frame, but obviously it's clear, and so you look through the central hole in the e-tran frame and to Jonathan's eyes and look at where he is looking on the board. And it works really well for him. I think it's a really simple piece of kit. And what Chantal, I think, was going to say, I'm just predicting, is that as a charity, we hear a lot about the challenges of funding for eye gaze technology or for assessment for access needs. And I think one of the things that we really want to put out there is that this doesn't need to be expensive in the beginning stages. Yes, ultimately, an eye gaze machine might be your go-to goal, and it might be something that you work towards, but having that shouldn't dictate whether the teaching begins. And so starting with something really basic, such as an e-tran frame, or even just a simple, we've heard of a teacher who wears a lanyard around her neck and will have two little cards on it, one saying yes and one saying no, and using the eyes for the learner to make a choice between yes and no. It's incredible how much learning you can get done that way. And so, yes, we're huge advocates for the technology. Is incredible when it works. And I think Chantal, I'm not wrong in saying we would love it to work for Jonathan, because it would enable him to have that communication without the need for another adult present, which of course changes up the dynamic, doesn't it? Having to rely on somebody else to be your communication partner. But it doesn't work for him. And therefore the low tech, much cheaper version, where we started, Jonathan's now extremely proficient and very quick using it. And so actually when he then trials new technology, which is always evolving, it can be quite frustrating for him because he's developed such proficiency using the system he does.
So I think at the beginning, before we started recording, Chantal, you said, although you wanted him to learn, you weren't sure if he was capable, but you wanted to try, you wanted to find out rather than ruling it out that he couldn't.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and that's so much what we say at Teach Us Too, actually. If you don't try, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if I decided that I didn't think he'd be able to do it, and I never gave him the chance to see whether he could do it, then he wouldn't be able to do it. And certainly at school, I think that's what he was experiencing. He had a sensory curriculum to the point that if there was a story being read, the class was shown the pictures and they were given things to feel, but they were never shown the text of the story, because the level of expectation was that they would never be able to engage with that text or read the text. So there was no point showing them the text. And if there's no point showing someone the text, and that's the level to which you really don't think anyone will be able to read, well, if you're not showing children text, then how are they going to learn to read? So I took him out, and I just didn't know what was possible. We did whole word reading, as I said, and it was a very simple scheme that Marion set me up with, which was brilliant. It just did whole word reading. We read a sentence, and then he had to match the picture with the sentence, and then the word with standing or sitting or whatever it was. And it was it was very slow. And actually, initially, it was really quite slow. I was doing a letter a week as well. And I rang her after a couple of weeks and I said, this has been a great experiment, but I just don't think it's actually working. He doesn't look very engaged. And I had a really experienced carer with me who'd worked with small children. She said, I think this is a bit difficult. He's not really getting it. And she said two things which completely changed. In fact, she hadn't said these two things to me, I would not be here today. Would Jonathan be back at special school? And I would have put it down as an interesting experiment for a month or so, but nothing happened. She said, make it more fun. Your listeners won't need to know this, but I was just terrible. It was really boring. I was bored. He was bored. And I know your listeners are teachers and just instinctively make things fun. So make it more fun. But the second thing was really counterintuitive, and this is the really interesting one. Make it harder. Actually find his zone of proximal development. Find that bit where he's having to work a bit in order to give you the answer. So I made it more fun, but crucially, I think for him, I made it harder. I found that ZPD rate was like, oh, yes, actually, I'm not just always going to get everything right. Sometimes I'm going to get it wrong. And this is actually kind of stretching, that kind of level of stretching. And it was like the light bulb switched on. And suddenly he's trying. And in terms of making things more fun, we're playing around with words. And although he's only reading whole words and his word bank is really quite small, we're making silly sentences. And then from the silly sentence he's made, I'm making up a whole rhyme. And it's all, it's kind of, I started to enjoy it. I like playing with words and I like reading and writing. So we were enjoying it together. And actually that made a big difference. And making it harder just kind of went, yeah, okay, I'm going to give this a go because this is engaging enough. And interestingly, when he started speaking and talking to us, he said at special school, I put on my cabbage face.
It's not terribly PC.
It's not, but that's how he described it. Those are his words, not my words. I put on my cabbage face. And I think sometimes he just said he was just bored and he'd disappear inside his head and he'd put on this face that just like, there's nothing going on here, move along kind of thing. And so occasionally we come across teachers who say, the children in my class can't do this. And I think, well, if you don't try, you don't know. And actually I saw it myself and I'm his parent, and I couldn't quite believe the change between, it wasn't quite full, as Jonathan would call it, cabbage face at home, but he definitely did look like this is too hard. And I think we instinctively then just want to make it easier, and the easier we make it, the less engaged he was getting. So yes, not PC cabbage face, but as I said, that was his.
Can I jump in there? Yeah. One of the things that brought to mind, Chantal, is just one of the courses we run is called Creating a Literacy-Rich Sensory Curriculum. One of the pieces of advice we got when we started to run training courses, and we don't do the training ourselves, we're not qualified to do that, but we employ the likes of Sarah Mosley and Marion Stanton, and we do the funding bit as a charity, and we ask them to come and run courses for teachers who are looking to teach literacy to their learners that are like Jonathan. And one of the pieces of advice we got, and I think it was really crucial in flipping the way we thought about approaching it, was to meet the teachers where they're at, because there's a lot of fear, I think, in classrooms about getting it wrong or not having the skills that are necessary, not having the support that is necessary to make that start. Often I also think that teachers are facing some, negativity or disbelief that it's worth it from various parts of professional bodies within their school. Head teachers, senior leadership, sometimes teaching assistants who are incredibly well-meaning but have often worked with these young people for a really long time in a kind of caring role. So we decided that we needed to come and meet the teachers where they were at. So we started at the point where they were, so with the literacy curriculum, and how can we inject text into that literacy curriculum? And it was about looking at what you're doing. We don't have to completely overhaul it. It's not that the sensory curriculum and the academic curriculum work in isolation. They can be layered. They can work together. And I think we ran that course for the first time last year, and it was definitely the most successful course that we have run in terms of the feedback from teachers. And we set a small task between session 1 and session 2, about a week apart, to go away and try 1 or 2 of the quick wins that Marion and Sarah had offered up as a way to expose those learners to text. And the feedback we got from one week to the next was astonishing. There were teachers coming back saying they had discovered that there were children in their class who actually knew and understood the entire alphabet, and they had no idea that this had happened. They had children who could recognise their name without their photo attached. I think often in sensory classrooms, you might do the register, and there might be a photo, and so you might then go point to your photo to suggest that you're here. And we said, why don't you put the text on the back, and yes, use the photo, and then turn it over and try just using the name. And children were able to distinguish and recognise their name from another, or from 2 others in some cases. And that feedback across the board was really fantastic, and I think it really filled us with confidence that what we're doing, we don't want to be in an echo chamber. We want people to really think it's possible and go and try it themselves. And it doesn't need to start big. We don't need to start thinking, right, how am I going to get these learners from our sensory classroom to university? It doesn't need to be that big. It's just small steps and integration.
We all know about spiky profiles for children with autism. They can do this. I think the spiky profiles are much more widespread than people realise.
Yeah.
I think what happens is you assume, okay, because they can't do this, they can't do X, Y, Z, F, G, P, T, and B.
Yeah.
No, you've assumed that. You have never actually found out whether or not they can or can't. And I think those things you were talking about, Sarah, is actually, rather than just assuming, let's find out.
Yeah.
Let's assume because they can't do this, I've made so many assumptions around this, but can they not? And that's what's interesting is I think where we think of literacy, for some people, that goes alongside talking.
Yeah.
So that literacy is just an extra tool in their belt.
Mm-hmm.
But for children like Jonathan, that's their primary communication. So it's not we're teaching literacy as, it will help him read a book.
Yeah.
It's actually completely transforming his life.
Yeah.
Because he now has a voice. People can now understand his personality much better, and he can have preferences. All those things which make us who we are, he can now do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something we talk about quite a lot, actually, for children who use AAC or who are non-speaking. Literacy is the key to unlocking their voice, as you said. It is the key to suddenly they can say anything they want. I've got Jonathan used to use an auditory scanning book, and I went back to the auditory scanning book, and I tried to say the book was frustrating, and I couldn't, because frustrating wasn't there. And our vocabulary as speakers is huge, and these books and communication systems are always going to limit what our children and young people can say, because vocabulary is enormous, and what we're offering them just can't be as many words as we speak. So yeah, it unlocks a voice.
And what I think I would say is, in addition to that, actually, the lack of speaking, the lack of voice is one of the biggest determinants as to whether you get, whether you are on having literacy education, whether you are being taught, because I think it's one of the biggest things that makes people assume incapability. Because your expression, if you haven't found access to communication, you're unable to express those preferences, desires, abilities, etc. So access is so important.
And another course actually we run is by Dr. Sharon Arnold, and she talks about teaching reading or assessing reading in minimally verbal or non-verbal autistic children and pupils. because so many of those assumptions, as Sarah said, that we make about children who have the label PMLD, which is the label Jonathan had, who might be physically disabled and non-speaking, actually those assumptions about non-speaking are also seen within autistic pupils and their profiles.
So, going back to Jonathan, as he found his voice and as he was able to share his thoughts with you, what were some of the things that he kind of told you? You went, oh, did not know that. Were there like preferences in music where he was like, please stop putting that music on?
Yeah, I did ask him if he found what he found frustrating, imagining he would say something like not being able to speak is very frustrating. And he said having his face washed. This was like an 9-year-old boy at the time. I'm like, okay, having your face washed is obviously the worst thing. I had to sort of also explain to him that just because you can say you don't want to have your face washed doesn't mean it therefore will never happen again. He wanted to bake every day, like every day. And for his 10th birthday, we got him a bread machine because I worked out that was a way to bake every day without actually having to like get everything out in the kitchen and bake. So I knew he liked baking, but I didn't realize it was such a big thing. He started to use his voice. He teamed up with his sister and he was spelling out letter by letter, slowly, things like, we need another baby. And I'm like, no, that's also something that you can spell now, but you're not, that doesn't work. We need a dog. And they teamed up together, and the echo for a dog, and they kind of this child, and you do it in front of people as well. When are we going to get the dog? Have you got? Can we see Jonathan using his board? And he'd use this opportunity to show them how he can spell out now. We need a dog, and when are we going to get a family dog? Or we are getting a dog. We've got a dog. We did get a dog. And just in terms of things, of his relationships with his friends at school. So he started going to mainstream full time. He went to our local primary school, and just watching those friendships just flourish from having been someone who went along one afternoon a week, and then new Jonathan came, and he sometimes had a book with him that he could sort of use a bit to communicate, but otherwise it was kind of pushing him around the playground. And suddenly they could start having conversations with him. There was a girl in his primary school who just picked up the E-tram frame and off she went, and they just disappeared. I mean, I don't know what they were talking about. Still don't know what they talked about. It's great that they started having those relationships that we all want for all our children, don't we? But to be able to see that as a parent was wonderful for him.
I always love the fact he teamed up with his sister. That's the bit that you kind of... And when we did a podcast on adaptive game controllers and things like that, it's like, right, so what was that? Why do they want to play gaming? And one of them was, I want to beat my sister at Mario Kart. And it is that sibling rivalry, that sibling bond that is so important.
Mm.
It reminds me, actually, Chantal, of a teenager we met. I think we met them at One Voice weekend a few years ago, where we delivered a talk about Teach Us Too, and a teenager who hadn't learnt to read and write at school and still wasn't able to read and write, said that they really wanted to be able to read and write because they wanted to use social media. They wanted to be able to WhatsApp their friends. They wanted communication. And I think you said earlier, literacy is not just about the academic progression of reading or writing. It's about opening the world and becoming an included part of society and finding ways to develop human connection. And it's just so important. It's so isolating not being able to communicate, I imagine. But yeah, she was just desperate to be able to contact her friends and use social media.
I can't remember his name. There's a film now, a documentary on Netflix, which I watched over Christmas about a boy in Norway, and I can't remember his diagnosis, but his families kept trying to get him to go out into the world and would take him out on holidays, and he would sit there in a wheelchair on the beach watching everyone else having fun. And all he wanted to do was be at home and play World of Warcraft. And his family thought he was just sat there alone. No, he had a huge world of friends that he only talked through the typing. So I can't remember how he typed, but it was a range of switches that he would use. and he would communicate, and everyone would talk about him as this amazing person. He's such a good friend, really, all this stuff. And he never let them know he was disabled. He never let him know the support he was in, the situation. He disappeared for a couple of months because he was in hospital. And it was when he died, he had told some people, and he'd given his dad his access to the blog. And it's only after his death did his family find out, actually, the world and the families his son had created, and the fact he more or less had an online girlfriend who lived in another country, who at his funeral helped carry his coffin. They had professors come over from the UK, people come over from the US to his funeral, and all these people, and they had all these stories to share with a family who were oblivious.
Wow. That story, it's amazing, isn't it?
And I can't remember it. I'll find a link, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes so other people can watch it. But it's a story I saw on BBC News years ago. I've absolutely loved it, and there's now a documentary with all the footage of him.
Wow.
And then, so you can see his life, and then he dies, and it sounds really sad. And then they go, but now look at it from another point of view, his online world, and it tells you a very different story.
Yeah.
And he would not have been able to access that without that literacy.
Mm-hmm. So true.
Really important. And I do like the fact that when you are communicating via text and things like that, it's a real leveling field.
Yeah.
So we're talking, we're listening, we're conversing spontaneously. That's a lot of skills required there, which we take for granted. As soon as you start removing one of them or two of them, you now are not able to be involved in this. But when you're on WhatsApp, you can take time.
Yeah.
You can be doing that communication in so many different ways, and the other person doesn't know. So they will just take you by what you say, not how you're saying it.
Yeah, so true.
So we've talked a lot about Jonathan. So as an organisation, how long has it been going?
We've been going since 2018. Actually, one last thing about Jonathan. He's going to be very upset if I don't mention that he's written a book called I Can Write. And this is relevant to your question because he wrote this book, I Can Write, it's his memoir about learning to read and write and the difference it made for his life. And he gets royalties from his book, and he wanted the royalties to make a difference for children like him. So all his royalties went in to Teach Us Too. We set up Teach Us Too because he said, this campaign is bigger than me. He started campaigning for all children to read and write. He said it's bigger than just me. It needs to be about lots of other children. And as Sarah said, we've had other examples of children who are starting to learn to read and write. We've got lots of them. So this is bigger than me. And also, I'm bigger than it. I don't want to spend all my life doing Teach Us Too things, which is why he's commissioned Sarah and I to carry on the work. So we set up Teach Us Too to receive the royalties from Jonathan's book in 2018, and so we've been going since then.
And there is a link to the book, so you can buy it in the show notes, and also a link to his blog, because he's got a blog as well.
I'm not talking about him now, but I'll be very happy with the link in the show notes.
So you've been going now 6-7 years, so kind of you've obviously helped a lot of children, and you've changed the views of probably a lot of parents and a lot of educationalists in kind of how they're viewing their children, their own children, all the children they work with. Have you got any kind of examples or things? I know you mentioned the course you did with those quick wins, or other things like that people can just go away and go, I might try that.
Yeah, actually, now's probably a really good opportunity to say I was thinking about this, Chantal, when you were explaining that Marion told you to make it fun and make it harder, because I'm not sure if you've heard of the 1,000,000-word gap, but Jonathan is from a family of readers, and although he wasn't being exposed to text at school, and he wasn't yet able to read and write, he was being exposed to a lot of text and language at home. And so he had been read to consistently from day dot. And having spent such a lot of time in hospital, I know, Chantal, you had read an awful lot of books to and with him. But the million word gap, I don't have the exact stats on me here, but it suggests that by the age of 5, if you have been read multiple books a day, and I don't mean enormous literary works of works of art. I mean just the books you would read to your typical 4 or 5-year-old. If you've been read multiple books a day, like I did with my children, and I think lots of people do, your exposure to words is about 1.5 million at that point. 1.5 million. If you have not been exposed to words at that point, I've got my numbers wrong actually, not 1.5 million, it's 1,005,000, I think. If you've not been exposed to reading and text, so you're not read to on a daily basis, then your exposure to language is about 5,000 words, just under. And so even if you are not yet learning to read and write, which we're not doing, I wasn't doing with my newborn baby, my 6-month-old, my 1-year-old. And yes, when they did a little bit of preschool, they were starting, I guess, in a neurotypical preschool to understand language, but I wasn't at home teaching them to do it. But I was reading to them. And I think you can't underestimate the importance of that language-rich environment in the home, regardless of your child's medical condition, diagnosis, labels. Stories and listening to voice and being exposed to that language is really, really important. So I wanted to drop that in there as a way of saying, parents, if you're reading at home when your child is preschool, that's enough. You know, you don't need to be teaching them to read when they're 4 or 5 years old. And one of the things that I know Chantal often says on our courses, as a parent, we are not teachers as parents, and although we, of course, as parents want to support our children's educational journeys, they go to school to learn. They go to school for their education. And if you were to find out that you sent your neurotypical child to school and they were having a lovely time and they were playing with bubbles and they were in ball pits and they were listening to songs and feeling floaty objects, and then coming home and you were expected to teach them to read after school, you'd be outraged. And so therefore I think we just want to sort of flip it on its head. This works both ways. It's not, we send our children to their special schools too to learn, and of course the level of care they need is different in terms of medical intervention, etc. And it's not easy. There's no quick fix. Every child is individual and every child's access will be different. But just because something's easy doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And so, from our perspective, we just think children go to school to learn, and we really, really want to empower parents to expect that to happen and empower or help to empower teachers in feeling capable to do so. I think historically there hasn't been training around it, and we don't want to suggest that there's, that teachers are ill-intentioned, because almost all of the time they're not. They want to do their best. They've chosen this career for a reason, and it's about enabling them to find the resources, to ask when they don't understand, to improve their skills around it, and therefore hopefully empower the children to find their voices.
And it's always that phrase, you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
And based on the information you may be given, is actually if they're PMLD, they cannot, and you'll be given that load of it, and that is what you believe because that's the information you've been given.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, go on.
There's a real issue, I think, with that label PMLD, because people treat it like it is a diagnosis, and it is not a diagnosis. No one gets diagnosed with PMLD. It is a label of best fit for children who look severely disabled, often non-speaking, usually in a wheelchair. And actually, we like to think of it as not PMLD, but PMALD. It's the access. They are profound and multiply access to disabled, because finding the access for each child can take a lot of time and a lot of patience and a lot of determination. Actually, say your eyes don't work, well, try something else. Keep trying to find the access for that child, and when you found the access, then you can start teaching them to read and write. But finding the access can be really problematic.
I know Jonathan can't use eye gaze, but I remember when eye gaze kind of arrived on the scene, and people started using it and playing with it, actually there were a number of children, even adults, where people had assumed they were unable due to their physical appearance and they were in a wheelchair and they can't do this. And they gave them eye gaze and they're like, please turn off this music. I hate this song. Please stop doing me scrambled egg. I want fried egg. And suddenly they realised that this person was fully aware, had been aware for years, had this amazing vocabulary because they've been listening to it for years and reading and all this stuff and taking it all in, but weren't able to let it back out again and communicate and share those preferences, any of that. And it is so important. So I know eye gaze did a huge thing, and I remember loads of people actually really going, we've really misunderstood these children. We've by their physical ability, we've assumed their cognitive ability.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, because the label PMLD is assigned as opposed to, diagnosed, and it's assigned often or more often prior to a child starting school. And so you haven't done any teaching, you've had no exposure to sort of attempting to find out what their cognitive ability is. And so it's sort of, yes, as Chantal said earlier, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think there's no formal, widely recognised definition of PMLD that people use. There are multiple different thoughts around the definition, but one of the definitions which seems to be held above others suggests that people with PMLD have a really wide and varied range of needs, but the most significant of which is a profound intellectual disability. Now, of course, if we're suggesting that they've got a profound intellectual disability, then we're being told to make those assumptions. Where was that from, Chantal? I can't remember the net. It was the supporting...
It was the PMLD standards.
Yes, it was the standards, exactly, that were released a few years ago. And within there, their definition suggests, that that's the most significant, of their disabilities, which is frustrating from our perspective.
And actually, that's why, as a charity, we spend a lot of time going to talk to schools. So we talk to special schools, and we've talked to trusts of schools, talking about the assumptions that are made and actually trying to break down those barriers, not just assumptions about children and pupils with PMLD, but actually all the assumptions we make about labels and labelling. And because someone's got a label, do we therefore put an unconscious ceiling on what we think someone is able to achieve?
Yeah.
So we do that for free, Sarah, Jonathan and I, and we go around different schools and just do that as a CPD session after school. And we've had a lot of feedback actually from people saying it's just really made them think about their practice, not just in PMLD classrooms, but sort of other classrooms as well, thinking about how labels can end up having this limitation on what you think a pupil can achieve.
I suppose in theory, if that is the definition, is Jonathan within that definition?
No. And how many are?
So would Jonathan more be under the label of PMPD? Profound and multiple physical disabilities?
Yeah, I definitely have physical disabilities.
Because that's the thing, is we assume all these disabilities means there's no intellect behind.
Yeah.
That's a very big guess. Very big statement, which, as you're finding out and isn't always true.
Yeah.
No, actually, I would, it'd be great to put a link in the show notes actually for an article that was written by a teacher in Cumbria called Emma Maskell, and it's called The Class That Roared. And she heard about Jonathan's story. She was teaching a PMLD class, and she went back and she thought, I'm just going to work really hard and find each of their access. And she found at the end of the year that none of them meted that label PMLD. It didn't fit any of the pupils in her class.
They were PMPD. They all had the physical disabilities, and all the
all
assumptions
non-speaking
had been made.
Yeah.
And all the assumptions,
And that probably... So that was amazing, because that transformed her understanding of her children. That would have then transformed all those children's lives.
Yeah.
Because actually, finally, I can tell them I don't like my face being washed. But also, then the families can now really communicate with their child.
Yeah.
And can share things. And it's rather than doing it to, when you're assuming there's kind of nothing going on, you do it to them. Now you're doing it with them, and they have, can we watch this? Can we do this? Can we bake every day?
Yeah.
You're now realizing you're not hunting for that personality and looking for a slight change. Actually, that personality is coming to you.
Yeah.
And she says sorry, Chantal.
I was just going to share there about transformational tales, actually, because we are starting to collect lots of stories. As we said, Jonathan's not exceptional, but what we've discovered is when we go and talk to people, if Jonathan says something like, "Don't make assumptions about us," that's the one thing people will take away. People listen when children who use AAC speak, because it's a big effort. And there are other children like Jonathan who've learnt to read and write. So we're starting to gather those stories. It's called Transformational Tales. There's information about it on our website. Just getting in those children's words, what does reading and writing mean to you? What does it mean to you to be able to read and write? And we've got a brilliant example of a teenage girl who said reading and writing for her means that she can read, she can enjoy the lyrics, she can read the language of the lyrics of the song she's listening to, and also choose the song she listens to, because she can ask specific ones. And you think, yeah, she's a teenage girl. She likes the language of the lyrics. This makes sense. If you listen to lyrics without knowing exactly what they're saying, it can be a bit confusing sometimes. And so it's just getting that in their own words. So if you've got any listeners who've got learners, or maybe they're a parent, they've got their own child, who would like to share their story, we'd love to hear it. And then just be able to show people, actually, this isn't about one child. This is about this child and this child and this child, and they can't all be exceptions.
And I think I find with lots of these children, music is a really big area. It's not about academic performance. It's being able to go onto Spotify and search for an artist and put that song on, which for us we take for granted. For that child who loves that song, has never been able to put it on, able to put it on when they want, as many times as they want, no matter what anyone else wants, is really, really life-changing to that person. And it is just being able to access the reading and the writing, being not dismissed that you cannot, being given that opportunity to try. And then, as you found out, that he could or couldn't, it was he hadn't found his way. And when you taught him his way, he obviously had all these, his thoughts didn't happen from that point. The thoughts were there.
Yeah.
His preferences were there.
Yeah.
He already hated his face being washed for years and things like that. And he liked the smell of baking and guessing. And all of that was already there. He just couldn't share it.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add? Anything you want to let our listeners know before we wrap up?
It's never too late, will be my message. For the teachers and the parents out there, we have got stories of teenagers and adults that are in the beginning stages of learning to read and write through using AAC. So this isn't about a big guilt trip. Our charity is not based on trying to make people feel that they've let young learners down. It's about moving forward with the knowledge we have now and opening our minds to the possibility that this may go somewhere. And that wherever it goes and whatever it leads to and whatever the end point is, if there ever is one, it doesn't matter. It's the journey and the process and what you gather along the way that is, as you said earlier, completely life-changing and transforming for these non-speaking, often very physically disabled young people whose only form of expression is to be able to use literacy in a way that enables them to have a voice. So please don't think it's too late. And if you need support, our charity is one of the places you can go and look for it. We offer our training for free. We have parent sessions as well, where parents come together. We talk about supporting literacy in the home, not teaching your child to read, but also supporting them with their homeschool partnerships and talking to each other. We had 3 parents last week who, I think the huge value in that session was them sharing their experiences with each other and offering each other advice and support, and then us sort of pointing them in the right direction. So yeah, please reach out.
Anything from you, Chantelle?
I think Sarah said it.
So at this point, I normally go, I always be sharing Chantal's and Sarah's contact details and also some links to find out more, but I think Sarah's kind of covered all of that. So in the show notes, you'll find lots of ways of contacting, finding out more about teachers too. You've also got their Facebook page. You've got Jonathan's blog, Jonathan's book, Jonathan's Facebook page, because he has his voice and he's using it, which is great. And I'll also find links to Emma Maskell and that Transformational Tales, and I'll put that in as well. And as always, you'll find the show notes wherever you listen to the podcast, but also on the Sendcast website. So thank you for listening to the show. If you aren't following us on social media, you will find us on Twitter at The Sendcast, on Facebook, The Sendcast, on Instagram, The Sendcast, on TikTok, Sendcast, and Blue Sky, which we're starting with, because it's who knows what's going on with Twitter or X. Sendcast, really imaginative names there. Keeping it simple. The Sendcast is created and produced by us here at B Squared, and we help to show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make. But do you know about Autism Progress? This is our framework for helping profile a pupil's autism and how it impacts them. It's based on certs and looks at communication, social interaction, emotional regulation, and flexible thinking. And Autism Progress also includes a wide range of strategies to help support the pupils. Visit the B Squared website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software and how it can help you. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Sendcast. It is goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.